Oh, some some people have very some people have ears that can pick up just very small. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this afternoon. We see the campus is quite quiet this time of the year, but we're glad that inside here it's warm and tropical, and also against the backdrop of the spring that is already settling in, and we're looking so exciting seeing some of the sunshine that reminds us of where we come from with all the heat and the tropics of Africa. Um, and so it's our pleasure to welcome you to this event, this public talk today. And I wanted at the beginning to quickly give some insight before I welcome and offer a quick introduction of our guest speaker. So this event is being organized, co-organized by the Office of the President of Carleton, the Migration and Diaspora Studies, the Feminist Institute of Social Transformation, Department of Law and Legal Studies, the Institute of Interdisciplinary Studies, and of course the Institute of African Studies, which is the lead coordinator of this event. We want to thank these programs for joining hands with us at a time where budgetary considerations become very key to organizing events like this. And so, thank you. Our guest speaker is Emerita Professor at the University of Ghana, Legon. She served as Director of the Social Development Policy Division of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and Director of the Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana. She holds undergraduate and graduate degrees in law from the University of Ghana and the University of Dar es Salaam, respectively, and a PhD in anthropology from Indiana University, Bloomington, United States. Her research, scholarly, and advocacy interests are in African development, women and minority rights, contemporary African migrations, and African higher education systems, and she has published widely in these areas. She's a fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences and vice president for the arts section, and she has received several awards and recognitions, including the University of Ghana's Meritorious Service Award, Ghana's Order of the Volta, an honorary doctorate degree from the University of Sussex, the Franco-German Prize for Human Rights and the Rule of Law. She is a senior fellow at the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, Accra, an honorary professor at the Nelson Mandela University, Port Elizabeth, in South Africa. Her key publications include At Home in the World, Contemporary Migrations and Development in Ghana and West Africa, Sub-Saharan, published by Sub-Saharan Publishers, and co-edited with the famous Amina Mama and Chairman Pereira. She has also published Change and Transformation in Ghana's publicly funded universities, a study of experiences, lessons, and opportunities with our own very dear Suli Gariba of blessed memory and Joseph Bodo. And this was published by James Corey, Oxford, and Whaley Publications, Accra. Her other publication of note is Africa and Gender with Catherine Cole and, not Cathy Cole, with Catherine Cole and Stephen Mischas, Indiana University Press. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Techia Manu as our special speaker for this event. Please take it away.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Induka, for that very generous introduction. I want to thank all of you for making time to be here with me this afternoon, and to thank those who are also listening online, who have joined online. And I want to thank the president of the university, Professor Wisdom Tete, Professor Nduka Otieno, and the other sponsors for helping me bring me here for this talk this afternoon. It's good to be back in Carleton. This is a university that, well, it's good to be back in Canada. I haven't been back in Canada for over 20 years. And Canada and the IDRC, Carleton University, have been very important to my intellectual and scholarly formation. And they are people that I collaborated with here early in my career. And, you know, so it was good that I was able to come in from the US, where I'm visiting for a short period, and to share with you some of my work. And coming back to Canada also reminds me of my own doctoral studies, which I did among Ghanaian migrants in Toronto. So Canada is home in several ways to me. So as Kathy reminded me, the title of my talk this afternoon draws on some of the work that I did for my doctoral studies, where I was looking at Ghanaians in search of security at a time of economic decline, which does not quite seem to have gone away, and subsequent work that I have done. And of course, my training and interest in the law that has led me to follow some of these developments. So the title is on Gender, Migration, Property, and the Law in Ghana. And it will be looking particularly or specifically at 3 cases decided by the Supreme Court of Ghana in 2021 on claims brought by migrant women against their spouses or significant others over property acquired during migration. So this is the outline of my talk. I look at migration and migrants in current political discourses, a bit on contemporary African migrations, international migration in Ghana, migration, gender, and property in Ghana, very little. And then I get to the Supreme Court cases, which will then explicate, you know, much of this. And I just want to say that one day I don't remember where I was in my office or at home, when I was contacted by a Supreme Court judge sent her clerk to come and to request some publications from me. I wasn't even curious, I just wondered why they would do that. But later, when I read the cases, I saw that some of those, the work that I had sent had been cited in the Supreme Court in those cases. So for me, these cases have a lot of salience, and I call those cases Migrations Day in the Supreme Court in Ghana. Okay, so some of these are the images that we see of migrants. Scores of African migrants arrive on Spain's Canary Island, and then we find, you know, all these rescue boats going out to rescue different groups, mainly not only young men, but also young women from the seas. And we know that the whole topic of migration has become the dominant signifier in contemporary politics. The figure of the migrant has replaced the communist, not quite the terrorist, but almost on the same lens. It's like an invasion, you know, of all these people. And we know that in public policy and popular debates, thinking and mobilization, the discourse on migration and migrants unites political parties and groups of different persuasions. Yesterday or 2 days ago, the governor of California was mentioning that they were going to stop public health funding for undocumented migrants. So it doesn't matter. The discourse is so powerful that whether you are left or right or whatever, you must center migration, and migration is seen as a threat. And yet, when you look at the figures, the facts against the public discourse and the hysteria, we find that migrants make up less than 4% of the global population. And it's grown very slowly, less than 1% since 2000. And women account for 48.1% of global migrant population. So it's really important to note that when we're talking about migrants, we're not just talking about men, we're also talking about women. And many of these migrants, despite the facts that they are a threat, they are unwanted, we know that they have become very important to the economies of countries in Europe and America, not only in the care and health sector, but also in agriculture, in industry, etc. And they keep the economies and societies of Euro-America running. Now, when we turn to contemporary African migrations, we know that Africa is the youngest continent in the world. 70% of Africans are under the age of 30, and that this population moves. But Afrobarometer data surveys show that the movements and migrations intentions are Africa-bound. There is a... What happened? There's a more recent Afrobarometer survey that suggests that maybe, especially among the young people, the destinations are changing, but still the majority, when we look at the migration intentions, because it's not cheap to move out of the continent. So the point is that the bulk of African migration takes place within Africa, and the study by the Africa Center for Strategic Studies 2023 showed that 80% of African migrants do not want to move outside the continent. And this was an interesting study done in the Washington Post in 2021 on these kind of intra-African migrations, where you get people saying, why would they want to leave the continent? I mean, so things are not working in their country, they move to another country within Africa. So in this case, you got people from Senegal moving to Cote d'Ivoire. And Cote d'Ivoire is a very interesting case because it has a very high proportion of migrants within its population. And this is also obscured when we think about what happens in a country like South Africa, where there is consistent xenophobia and the suggestion that, they're being overwhelmed by other Africans. And when you think that it has a much higher GDP, etc. So in this study work by the Washington Post, it says foreigners now account for nearly 20% of the country's economy, more than anywhere else in Africa. And as somebody says, I didn't have to go to some unfamiliar world to find my peace. I'm still right here in West Africa. So this Gaji was a very interesting thing, but I'm not going to talk about it. This was a soap opera in Senegal called Mistress of a Married Man, and it provoked a lot of uproar from the imams, and Gaji had to leave Senegal, but then she went to settle in La Côte d'Ivoire. Now, when you come to Ghana, and this is a scene from the airport on yeah, people boarding for a flight, and it's easy to think of everybody leaving as a migrant, but we know that that is not true, that people are traveling, so it doesn't quite capture, but it could be the prelude, or some of them are continuing migrants, some of them are travelers, etc. But this is a familiar scene from the airport. And when we look at Ghana, we know that present-day Ghana itself has been part of a historical migration confluence that has produced major polities and economies in West Africa and the Sahel, and trade in salt and cola, etc., were major attraction for traders, including those from North Africa and earlier Europeans who were in search of trading opportunities. And when formal colonialism comes in, it ushers in, large-scale economies based on agriculture and mining that drew laborers, traders, and middle persons from other parts of Africa. And Ghana became a major migrant receiving society. And this was reinforced in the early independence period by the Pan-Africanist outlook of the first president, etc. And Ghanaian students started emigrating from the late 50s and the 60s. Before, of course, from the 1930s, 1920s, wealthy families sent their children abroad to be educated. But from the late 50s and 60s, it becomes part of state policy to send students for specialized training. But it is not till the early 1970s that you have this the immigration of professionals, not only to Europe, but to Nigeria, to other places. And this is also accompanying economic crisis, the debt crisis, etc. And then from the 1980s, Ghana slowly now becomes an immigration society where there are more people leaving than coming in. But still, there's quite a lot of migration. Even after the expulsions from Nigeria, many Ghanaians move further south to Botswana, to Lesotho, to South Africa, to the then Bantustans, etc. And it was still a minority that was leaving. But as I found out in my own study here of Ghanaians who lived here, especially because of political factors, then you get this large-scale migration where people are claiming refugee status, etc. And increasingly, the society becomes reshaped by migration, such that there is hardly a household or a town where somebody has not migrated. And it has, by the turn of the century, that is by the 2000s, you find that migration has become a defining feature of Ghanaian society. It accords status, enables people to meet their basic needs, influences gender relations, and gives rise to several contradictions, tensions, and abuses. And as I have said, women are very much a part of this pattern, either migrating on their own as professionals, nurses, teachers, etc., as wives, as students, etc. And we know that there is this active poaching in the healthcare sector where many people are persuaded or enticed to leave to serve in the healthcare sectors in the destination societies. So we know that migration, for many would-be migrants, migration is viewed as a way of securing their presence and their futures. And landed property forms a large part of this. Acquiring a house, building a house in Ghana is very desired, and It serves as economic security, but also emotional peace from the entrenched abuse of tenants and leases of property. And we know that if we look at Ghanaian history, women in different communities have had different property rights, whether they are married or not. And we know that within conjugal units, for instance, spouses have defined roles, with women mainly responsible for household labor and childcare. But they are also expected to actively generate economic self-sufficiency, and we do not have community of property, so you do not merge your wealth with your husband's, and the courts, etc., have recognized the rights to independent production and property ownership. So for migrant women as well, securing their own property is a major ambition. It forecloses the likelihood of tensions with the family of a deceased spouse, assures social respectability, and secures one's economic security. It also challenges the use of finance as a tool of control in relationships. And when you look at, as I said, the legal framework governing property rights in Ghana, we have the plurality of laws. We've got the different customary systems. We've also got the state system. And the gender asset gap study showed by Odro and co. showed that throughout different wealth quintiles, women have lesser property or assets than men, whether within the richer quintile, even as they own much more, you know, the men in the richer quintile have much more assets than women, all the way down to the poorer quintiles. And the type of assets that can be classified as property also changes. And in my own work, I have a paper called This Place is Not Ghana, where showing a lot of contestation between migrant men and women. The issues around property acquisition and assets figures very majorly. And the issues around social differentiation and power relations border very much on these kinds of assertions. And yeah. So this is the front of the Supreme Court of Ghana. And in 2021, so one of the cases was decided within 3 months, on 24th March 2021, on 14th April 2021, and on 14th April 2021. The Supreme Court decided these 3 cases that were claims. In the first case, actually by the former husband against the tenant and his ex-wife, and a pastor who held a power of attorney for the wife. And in the second case, so the Janet Opoku was the wife who had been resident in Germany. And so she migrated. The husband never migrated. He was always at home with the children. And then eventually, I think her sister applied for one of the diversity lottery visas for them, and they won it, and they migrated to the US. And then soon after the migration, they got divorced, and they returned to Ghana. And now, that case was the Richmond Boama Berima was the ex-husband who was now claiming a house. In the second case, you had a woman who met a man in Belgium where they purportedly got married, and they got into business and they returned to Ghana. They continued to acquire property, and there was a dispute. And the woman, first she brought a claim for a dissolution of marriage, and subsequently for distribution of property. And then the third case was a woman who had migrated to Italy, met another Ghanaian who promised to marry her, and they acquired property in Ghana, etc. So what I've done is that I've set out the different cases and the different claims. So I've said, and the important thing, so the cases were decided in 2021, but not when the cases started. So in the first case, it started in 2008, okay? And the man wanted a declaration of title to property acquired during marriage in the name of his wife. And the woman counterclaimed, no, this is not yours. Now, when you read the record, you find that when the woman was in Germany, she sent money to the husband to buy land. Interestingly, the man buys the land, puts it in the name of the wife, and subsequently a house is built. Now, I mean, we could spend a whole day here talking about the process of trying to register land and all of those kinds of things. So as we know from the common law, possession is 9/10 of property. So once you've managed to put up the house and you're living in it, it does not matter that you do not have title deeds. But the important thing is that when the land was bought by the husband in Ghana, he did not put it in both their names. He put it in the name of the wife, because that was always the intention. It was the wife. As I've said, there's no community of property. So it was the wife who had sent the money. The land had been bought, put in her name, and the house had been built. And there was no contestation about who might own the house until they returned from the US and the marriage is dissolved. Okay. So the case is decided in 2010 in the High Court. And incredibly, the judge does not decide on who owns the building. There is a tenant. They were not living in that house. There's a tenant in the house. So it's almost like an ownerless property, which was the central claim. So now the man files an appeal at the Court of Appeal, and the case is decided in 2013. And the man has a very powerful witness, an important man who says, this woman, what does she know? I was the one who gave sand and stone and etc. So yes, this is the man. So you can see issues of class and status and gender intermixing, and then the Court of Appeal says, yes, the man owns the property. Even though, and I'm reading the cases from the Supreme Court, so I do not have the original. These are appeal cases, so you can only read the record from what is there. And the man actually confesses that he forged some documents. He did this, he changed this, he did that, etc. But the court does not bother with it, especially because he has this powerful witness. So they declare him the owner. And the woman is still not satisfied. And she takes an appeal to the Supreme Court. And for a case that starts in 2008, the decision is not given until 2021. And this is where, and it is interesting, in the Supreme Court, the judges, the main person who decides, who writes the judgment, is a former professor at the university and a woman. And she gets into the whole issue about migration and changing, property rights and gender relations in Ghana. rubbishes the testimony of this important man, that just because you give sand and stones, that doesn't build a house, etc. And that. And then what about all the confessed fraud that this man says? He should be in prison. He's been saying that he forged the woman's signature. He claimed that the woman has sold the property to him. So he does not challenge the basis that the property was first acquired in the name of the wife, but he claims. And then so where did you get the money from? Oh, I took a loan from my employers. Now, this woman was in Germany at the time. So how did she sign all those documents, etc.? So there was a fraud. And so eventually they decide the case that it's the woman who owns that property. As in the second case, the case started in 2000, first as a matrimonial dispute, but it was struck out in 2007. So she had first applied for dissolution of marriage and declaration of joint ownership of 2 landed properties in some locations in Accra. But in the course of the trial, it comes out that at the time that they purported to get married in Belgium, both of them were married to different people. So it was a marriage of convenience and therefore illegal. So that's why it's not treated as, like it cannot be, you cannot get a divorce for a marriage it was not a marriage in the first place. So that's why it's now reinstated as a property claim. Okay, we were not married, that's fine, but we acquired property together. How do I get my property back? So this is 2009. And in the course of the trial, the quote-unquote husband dies in an accident. Okay, so he's substituted by his older son and his current wife. And it's like, oh, we don't know this woman, she's just an imposter. And interestingly, they had a house where at the front of the house, they had used their initials, the man's initials and the woman's initials on the front. And all the workers, the woman called the workers, everybody knew that they were a couple. So they asked the man, so what are these initials? Okay, so let's say I'm Anita Brown and you are John Mensah, and we have done A, B, J, M. The man says, oh, it's just a made-up thing. And the woman is saying, no, those are our initials, So at the High Court, the woman wins. But something strange seems to be happening in the Court of Appeal. So in the Court of Appeal, the woman loses. And she files a further appeal to the Supreme Court. By this time, the man is dead, and it is his son and the man's widow who are parties. Eventually, they agree that, yes, there was no marriage, but we will treat them as business partners. So they did make, both of them made contributions, and we will share the property between them. The last case started in 2008. It was struck out in 2014, and then it was reinstated in 2016. And I cried when I read the proceedings. So this woman, Amasewa, had migrated to Italy on her own. She lived in a village. She was working as a carpenter. And then she meets this man somewhere around Naples. And it's like, why are you living in a village? Come live with me in the city, So he persuades her, and she moves to the city with him. And he promptly sets her up as a sex worker. And then he's like a pimp. And this woman is a very successful sex worker. She makes so much money. They buy so much property. The man takes her home to Ghana, introduces her to his mother, and the man is Muslim, and the mother says, we are Muslim, so I have to train you to become a proper Muslim wife, etc. And they acquire property at Medina in Ajirigano. Ajirigano is a kind of upscale neighborhood in, in Accra. Medina is kind of lower middle class, but respectable houses. So they acquire these two houses. The woman gets a shop at Mokola Market. Whilst they are away, the man puts his father there in charge of the shop. And then they ship all these machines and cars to Ghana. On one of her trips home, apparently she's pregnant. She loses all her documents. She has a stillborn baby. And the man says, no, I don't know you. So she's in Ghana for an extended stay. Eventually, she has a mental breakdown. It's difficult for her to make ends meet. It's with a lot of difficulty that her sisters are able to get the man to send some money for her upkeep. When she tries to go to the two houses, they say, we don't know you, you know. So she's kind of wandering the streets. That's why the case is started and it's almost abandoned, you know, because she's going through all these problems. Then it's revived in 2016. So she sues the man for breach of promise to marry, because now the man says, no, I don't know you. She says, I made a lot of loans to you. And in Ghana, husbands and wives can make loans, because as I said, there's no community of property between them. So you can owe your wife can also owe you money. And she demands half a share of the property at Medina and Ajirigano, half of the 7 machines, industrial machines that they brought, an account of proceeds of the sale of 7 vehicles and reimbursement plus interest, return of the shop at Mokola, and general damages for deprivation. So she wins at the High Court. Then at the Court of Appeal, the husband's lawyer, in the middle of the trial, says, this woman is a self-confessed sex worker. Sex work is immoral. Surely it would be against public policy for the law to allow her to benefit from her immorality. So she loses at the Court of Appeal. And then she goes to the Supreme Court. And the same judge who was in the first case says, so let us agree that she's an immoral woman. She cannot benefit from her sins, but you can benefit from her sins, you know? So eventually, she wins at the Supreme Court. But look, this case starts in 2008. This judgment is given in 2021. There's the assumption that the assets have been preserved, that they can be traced. Because even after you have won, you must now go into execution, try and enforce, you know. But I believe that the same determination that led to all these years of taking the case would prevail. And I have always thought of contacting the lawyers to find out, you know, and getting to see, this is my anthropological self coming out, getting to meet the claimants, the female claimants in the case, to find out. Especially in the last case, the emotional toll of being denied, you know, losing your child, you know, having a mental breakdown, being destitute, and all of those kinds of things. But the point is that in the end, and so in all the cases, there were female judges on the panel. They were also, this is where I see the kind of impact of scholarship on litigation yeah. So these, at least one of the judges was interested in the scholarly work on migration and what it was bringing out, and applied it to the judgments for a fair result that captures really the ethos of migration, why people migrate, and for women, that desire and moving away from this kind of static and fixed position that women are juridical minors, that they are dependent on husbands, but recognizing that, I mean, in fact, in the last case, I don't even think that the man deserved half. I think the woman was generous in her claim in asking for a half share. I guess to say that you wanted everything could have been seen as greedy, so it was like a tactical stand when it was clear. So, I mean, the man was saying, this woman, she already had 5 children in Ghana, just abusing and scandalizing her. But it didn't stop the courts from arriving at a fair result. So I've shown some of these kind of properties. They're not necessarily owned by migrants, but just, you know, the cars, the houses, the, you know, second-hand clothes and shoes and stuff that migrants bring home to share. And of course, not all the houses are in such plush areas. In fact, in the first case, the property was located in Achimota somewhere, so it's an old area, etc. So I just wanted to sum up by saying that it's important to look at the reality of migration versus the discourses and current narratives that we hear, and the fact that we have production systems that need cheap labor, and which shifts the burden of global production and social reproduction to migrants from the South. And when we look at African migration, mobility is as ingrained in Africa as anywhere else in the world, and is tied to livelihood systems. And we have mobilities within the continent and outside of it. And we see that Ghanaian migration is an avenue for accumulation of coveted resources such as houses and other forms of property, but it generates a lot of contestations, and that gender becomes a core organizing principle in migration. But you have states saying that they want to encourage remittances, benefit from remittances, etc. But when it comes to protecting migrants and their interests, you do not find that same kind of assertion. So there's a general policy on responsiveness to the needs of women, etc. But for the persistence of these people over a long time, I mean, 15 years trying to, and then you must pay your lawyers, you know. I'm also curious about how they managed to, how many lawyers they changed in the process, and how they financed the cost of litigation. And, so when I look at the cases and the decisions, I see some judicial notice of changes in the society, but it depends on the court, because if it was at the Court of Appeal, all those people lost at the Court of Appeal. So what happened? What was happening at the Court of Appeal? Is it that the judges were ignorant? Were they bribed? I mean, what really happened? You know, and in the case of that, the last case where the issue of sex work had been raised, the Supreme Court says no. If you want to cite Italian law, you have to do it, you have to give notice to the other party. You cannot kind of just take it out of your pocket and shake it. It should have been part of your pleadings from the beginning. So procedurally, it was even wrong, you know, for that. The procedure that was used was wrong. But the Court of Appeal got away with it. But for the persistence of the plaintiffs and or the respondents and their counsel, that would have been the end of the case for all of them in the Court of Appeal. So we find gender and class biases and stereotypes. Who is believed? Whose testimony, shakes anybody? And then there's also the issue of documentation and receipts. 20 years after the fact, or 30 years, where are the receipts for the cars that you shipped? This woman just had a notebook that somehow she managed to preserve that had, the different things. So if she did not have the notebooks, despite the existence of the assets, would she have been able to claim those kinds of assets? And clearly, I think that we need, so when I've given a version of this seminar in Ghana, and there was somebody from the law faculty. So if you're looking at it just as a lawyer, you can look at it very differently from me looking at it as a legal anthropologist, So it's like, oh, okay, so they were just interested in whether the rules and things were followed. They were not going to get into the whole scholarship and discourse around migration and what it means. And as I've said, how do we foster an interest in the protection and welfare of migrants beyond remittances and possible investments? We have, in 1993, when our constitution came into effect, Parliament was supposed to, soon after the coming into force of the constitution, promulgate a spousal property bill. We're in 2025, so the soon has become 32 years, 33 years. There is no spousal property right law. There have been bills, but when it gets to Parliament, the MPs are not happy with it. So does it mean that she can claim, she can take this? So it reflects the issues of power and gender and representation. And so if there was that spousal property bill, then the fact that they had cohabited, the issue about whether they were married or not, etc., may not have been necessary. And sometimes when you engage with women who live, migrant women in the diaspora, they still think that, no. The law in Ghana is like this, it does not allow this. But so even a judgment like this is not widely known among migrants and diasporas, and it might also help to shape how people, conduct their businesses. It's not that you're going to have a notebook and you're going to record everything, but perhaps it might make people more careful. It might also allow men to know that they do not have unfettered rights and that there'll be some checks and balances. So thank you, and I welcome any questions that you might have.
Yeah, so we have microphones. Thank you so much for that enlightening, sometimes very discomforting, details about these issues. I think it's very important as scholars, and especially as activist scholars, that our work can get into the Supreme Court and be read and possibly influence some of the decisions, or at least, recenter focus on some of the work that we do. Thanks so much for the very important work that you do. So we have microphones, or are we using the put? So we'll just bring the mic to you. If you raise your hand, then we can get a mic to you. Yes, we have someone here. And then if you're online, please just send us, indicate by either raising your hand online, or if you want to send a question, we'll also be able to accept that. Yes, please go ahead. And then so that we just have a little sense of who is here. Just your name and your affiliation. will be fine so that we know who is talking. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talk. My name is Chris Aranda. I'm a Carleton alumnus. I was wondering if you could provide maybe an anthropological perspective on the nature of judicial appointments in Ghana at the different levels of the structure, because my broad impression, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the Supreme Court seems to be much more innovative in taking into account academic research to drive these decisions than the lower appellate courts, which are perhaps executing some of more the pre-existing norms. So I'm wondering if you could comment on how that sort of human resources, if I can put it that crudely, a facet of this plays out.
Thank you, Prof, for your presentation. Akinla is my name. I just completed my PhD in anthropology, actually. I was just wondering if, just to ask, if the judge who decided the first two cases, the first and the last cases, was to have a different gender formation. What do you think would have been the outcome of those cases? Do you think it's going to become a different ball game entirely?
Okay, maybe we'll take one more question and then she can answer, and then we can take another round of questions. Does anybody else want to ask a question? Yes.
Thanks, Prof, for your presentation. I'm Shika Kujau, and I'm affiliated to the History and African Studies Department. And my question is, I'm curious about legal pluralism. You touched on it briefly, and so I'm curious about how customary laws in Ghana intersected with these cases that you presented. How were they included? How did they impact the proceedings of the cases and the eventual resolution of the cases?
Hello, I'm Leslie Braun, affiliated with University of Basel, Switzerland. Thank you so much for your talk. It made me think about in a lot of different directions about gender and social change. I thought that was really fascinating, and I was wondering if these cases and other cases of this sort of female migrants have become sort of fodder for social popular discourse. Do women in all manner of jobs in Ghana and abroad talk about these sorts of cases? Publicly on television shows, does it make its way into sort of, other forms of media? Thank you.
Thank you very much for these interesting questions. I think the first two questions are similar in terms of judicial formation and what difference the levels make. So you can enter the judicial profession in different ways. You can apply to be a magistrate and then rise through the ranks, to be a circuit court judge, become a high court judge, be promoted to the appeals court, and ultimately to the Supreme Court. But it is also possible for you to, and in all cases, you must be a lawyer. You must be a trained lawyer. And then you can also be appointed to the Supreme Court after many years of practice at the bar. So, the points that you raise are interesting. One of the things I have been doing over the past 3 years as a senior fellow at the Ghana Center for Democratic Development is that I have been coordinating strategic litigation against a proposed anti-LGBT bill in Ghana. And the larger question that it raises is about what law students study during their training. So one of the things we find is that human rights are really not core component of the curriculum of law students. That they can take it as an elective, but it's not mandatory. So it's possible to rise up to the Supreme Court with no real human rights training, and that includes since women's rights are human rights, it would also expose you to the rights of women and their entitlements. You know. So I wouldn't say that the Supreme Court is always more innovative. It was shocking for me. I actually felt embarrassed that the Court of Appeal was coming up with those kinds of decisions. There's a Judicial Training Institute which offers programs for judges, you know, and it's almost like continuous judicial education. My worry has been whether, and I think I did speak to one judge about it, whether there is a review of judgments without fettering anybody's judicial independence to try to say, but this is so patently wrong. How did you manage it? But they would say, there's the appeals process. That is where what you use to address patently wrong decisions. But it takes time, it takes money, it takes a lot of resolve, you know. And there has to be an inbuilt process within judicial systems for patently wrong decisions to be corrected. But yes, in answer to you, it does matter who is on the bench. It does matter. So she was not alone. She was part of a panel, but she wrote the lead judgment, you know. And even in one case, the second case, where the outcome was positive, the judge who wrote that judgment, he was much more you know, he didn't get into the whole kind of migration business. So it mattered that this person had moved from academia to the bench, was aware of work that had been done in the university, and could tap into it. I doubt that the decisions, they could have been the same at the Supreme Court on other principles. Do you see? On equity, fairness, facts. The problem, though, is that at the appeals level, you don't litigate facts. The facts are litigated at the basic level. So you can only make appeals on the basis of law, that the law was wrong. You cannot, at the Supreme Court, you're not going to call new witnesses to a case. You can only look at the record and say that, on the face of the record, this is wrong. It is against this law, against that. So who gets on the bench matters, and the formation. So I am very particular. I mean, that's one of my concerns about what students are exposed to, what lawyers get exposed to, and what judges get exposed to, so that they have a broader issue. And it also points to this issue about the dissemination of decisions, because if unfortunately we do not really have specialized, you see a headline in the media, a woman gets this, but it does not get into it, you know. So it's very interesting what you say, how even the stuff that, you know, we have this Nollywood and all this Africa cinema and video stuff, and how popular culture gets informed and shaped by such decisions. So that must be the job of activists and scholars, you know, to take that. It's too much to expect the courts. They are just in some reified space, you know, so they give those decisions. So you would need well-trained media people to kind of transmit, to disseminate and transmit it, so that it can infuse popular culture and activate, you know, social action. the issue of legal pluralism, the problem in our states is that it's a hierarchy of laws, right? So, um, in a way, the men in the cases, they did not articulate it, but it was like the shared knowledge, the shared position that, is the man, pioneer man who goes out and makes things. But precisely the women were challenging those claims, and they were not, no one was citing customary law itself, but in the decision of the Supreme Court, it was also saying that times have changed, and that the kind of assistance that women where it's a stated position of the law anyway that um, if your wife assists you, it's to kind of for subsistence things, but when you begin to acquire property, and then she's also claiming that, and it's interesting because the woman was not claiming the man's property. She was saying, this is mine. Okay? So there's no principle of customary law which says that women's property belong to men. She's saying, this is mine. I paid for it. I bought it. I send the money. You put it in my name. So basically, how does it change? And listen, the man even says, you sold it to me. And the woman says, hey, where? How? So customary law infuses the understanding of that, but the claims, and that is why in the second case, it was decided on commercial principles, that you were business partners and you acquired property. So half shares are equitable. So you can use principles of equity, etc. If you had gone to a settlement at a chief's court or an Ohiman's court, a female chief or a male chief's court, that's where the customary law principles would have come into play. But once you opt for the state courts, then you're going to be using those kinds of principles. Yeah. Joe, do you have a question?
So what I wanted to know is that if the migrants, the case in Germany, if they were both in Germany and this took place, and I don't know the German law, but I suspect the law would be such that ownership of property would belong to both parties in the marriage. What was brought into the marriage and what was created after the marriage will belong to both. Now, it seems to me in Ghana it's not the same, which again I'm also ignorant about the Ghanaian. So, couldn't it be a case in terms of all these cases that you cited, that is there a case where, because let's say Canadian or wherever the migrants are, the laws that prevails in that their residence will supersede the laws of Ghana, said that they will be in a position that the Ghanaian law would be able to say that, look, you lived in this country A, where the laws protects the woman's rights and the rights to the property or whatever it is. Is there something like that? Because it seems to me that, you could be married to somebody in this part of the world, and once you get to Ghana, it's a different ball game. All the properties will turn over to the man. Am I correct?
But first of all, the property, you use the law in the place where the property is located. The property is in Ghana. Even in Germany or the US, you can do a prenuptial agreement. What I had before marriage belongs to me. It's what we acquire during the marriage. It's what we acquire. I mean, it is significant that in the case of the woman, it's the woman alone who migrated to Germany. The man never migrated to Germany. He lived in Ghana all the time. She goes to work, presumably to ensure that.
My question was more, would it be different if they both were in Germany?
Yeah, but it will still depend on what is being claimed. So in the case of the people who were in Italy, they were both in Italy. The man is saying everything belongs to me. You don't own anything. It belongs to me. And the judges are saying no. So first of all, it matters. Where you lived does not matter. That's not the law that is applied. So it's like coming here and telling a Canadian court in Ghana this. It's like, go back to Ghana and plead your law. Here we are. Now, if the property is in Canada, what can the Ghanaian courts do? Because then you must get into how you enforce foreign judgments, etc. So let's look at what happens, not what if. So in all three cases, the properties were in Ghana. In the first case, the woman said she acquired it by herself. The man says, but you sold it to me. Now that becomes a claim, right? Where is the receipt? The time, the receipt that the man comes up with, that woman could not possibly have given the receipt. She was not in Ghana, etc. So it was like a scheme to take away from the woman, especially now that they were no longer married. And the courts affirm her claim that it belongs to you. In the second case, it is treated as a commercial transaction, and each of them gets half. Okay. In the third case, the man is saying, no, you're not my wife. I don't even know you. Maybe we had an affair, all of those kinds of things. So all that property belongs to me, including the shop that my father is occupying in Mokola. She's able to prove her claims. She gets her shop back. She gets the half share of the houses, and they also share whatever still exists of the machines and the cars, etc. If the claim was that the property was jointly acquired, then there would be no problem. If it's jointly acquired, each of you gets half, right? But in all cases, people are claiming that I got this by myself. So this is what the judges must decide, between these claimants, who do we believe? How do we share the property? Especially where, in all cases, there is no relationship anymore. This one has divorced, the other one, he's died, he had another wife. And in the third case, the man says, you're nothing to me. You're just a sex worker, and, you don't deserve anything. So, so I know a couple in the US, a Ghanaian couple in the US who got divorced in the US, and they had property in both the US and in Ghana. So the property in Ghana was shared between them. They had two houses, so each one got one. And the one in the US was also shared between them, and they sold that one because there was a mortgage on that. The thing about the houses in Ghana is that usually there's no mortgage, so, and that's part of the sweat, because all those houses, there's barely a mortgage system in Ghana. So it's the tears and the sweat, and it's not like you have a mortgage of 50,000 and 20. It's all or nothing. So it becomes even more painful when you are deprived of that property.
Yeah, thank you.
Louise, do you have a question? Oh, okay.
Thank you so much. My name is Evelyn. I'm from I run an organization called Stand Out Africa, and I'm curious, with your time and the experience that you have, how does a young woman, how does a lady safeguard themselves from the lacunas we just interacted with this afternoon? Thank you.
Well,
Well, you haven't told me what the young lady is doing, who she's with, what she's trying to secure herself from. All I would say is that the young lady and her friends should get as much knowledge and information as possible about, especially developments in the law. These things don't only happen in Ghana or in Africa. I think property claims, unless you have very secure legislation, they are apt to be contested, and they still are, even where there is legislation. So you need clarity, knowledge, because sometimes it's like, oh, we'll last forever. Nothing will happen, Nduka. So I don't know how you would advise your daughter if she came to ask you how she secures herself in this lacuna. But I think it's important for women, especially in the diaspora, to also not believe that it's a changeless, um, environment. That things have changed. They need to educate themselves. You need documentation. You need, if it belongs to both of you, put it in both your names. Don't just depend on somebody saying, I bought us this land and you have to trust me, and somebody's doing it. So I'd say knowledge, I'd say awareness, but also trust. I mean, you have to communicate. There's a lot of communication that is needed, because I think often people just, either they think that, oh, in Ghana, this is how things are. So sometimes you're telling somebody who lives in the diaspora that, in Ghana, they say, no, that's not true. Go, just find out. So people also do not involve legal and other professionals until it is a bit late, and then it gets really murky. But it all does not happen only to people in the diaspora. It happens also at home. And property claims go on all the time. That's why lawyers make money. Is there anything from anyone online? Okay. Okay.
Well, I think that if we don't have any more questions, we'll have to wrap up, and just a little early, we're billed for 2:30, but just closing almost towards there. I want to use this opportunity again, Prof, to thank you so much for traveling down here and then making a time to give this very interesting and very important talk. In everyday life, as young people, as older people, we do take a lot of things for granted. And the law and the emotions sometimes can be at odds, you know. And then I also think about one other part of this experience that may not have been in your lecture, but I just thought that we could ruminate on. For diaspora, remittance looks like the easiest part of it. Like you just go, before now, Western Union, now there are just a multiplicity of different kinds of wallets that you can put in money and send. And it's not surprising that as of yesterday, there's a news break about, in the United States, about taxing, some kind of taxation about remittance. I don't know how that's going to play out. But it's actually in line with a whole lot of things going on down south that are troubling. If you think about the complicated situation of migrants and of immigrants and of diaspora people, and adding another layer to it, then the other part of it that is even more cumbersome is that when it comes to property, there are also people who live in the diaspora who think they have built a mansion from remittances they have sent, only to get home and to realize that the money has vanished or somebody has used it for something else. And it reminds me of this joke about online ordering. What I ordered and what I got versus what I got, you know.
Oh.
So you're going to see these beautiful items on some of the very compelling, and then it looks big. And then you just order this big thing. And then it arrives and it's like, no, this is not true. It's like it's Matchbox. I'm like, no, that's not what I ordered. And property itself even becomes one of the areas where this has happened. You spent a lot of money trusting a family member or a friend, remitting money. They're building you a house and actually sending you videos and updates on the house with pictures.
Hmm.
So you can imagine if that happens, much less when we think about, relationships, marriage and every other thing that has to do with property and how this plays out. And the other context in Africa or in most places, property, because we have natal homes, so property is so critical because it represents some kind of, planting of your roots. Whether you get back there or not becomes a different matter. On the whole, extremely important topic about a life of Africans in the diaspora and also their linkages and connections, very often complex, with home. Thank you for this, and then we will take a moment after to take some photos. We'd like to further document this event. But I wanted to also openly say that we have taken some photographs. If you have any concerns and would like to use the photographs on our websites or social media, but if you have any concerns about it, we haven't put out any formal notice for you to sign, but if you alert us, then we'll watch out for your face and don't share it in any of the photos. But meanwhile, we have this talk very fully documented by our colleagues from the university, teaching and learning, and classroom technology. Thank you so much for the support you've rendered. This event couldn't have been possible without the support of the ever-dependable IAS staff, Gabriel and Susa, who have worked tirelessly to put this together. Please, let's give them a round of applause. And then once again, I'd like to thank our various units who have lent their support for us to be able to hold this event. And of course, we would have been speaking in an empty space if you didn't make it this afternoon on a Friday afternoon heading into a long weekend. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you so much. No. Yes. Um, you see what happens when you're so excited after hearing the talk. It's like enjoying a meal and forgetting the dessert. We have a small gift to memorialize your visit, and I'm really, really glad to present this to you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's a piece of the Institute of African Studies from here that she is taking away. Africa Matters. All right. And we do have some light refreshments here. I wish we had jollof rice, but maybe when you come back in the fall. Not, in fact, Nigerian. look, at, look at the eye. See the eye Prof gave me.